first off, let's talk houseplants. If you know me at all, you know that I love my tropical plants. I've got all sorts of tropical plants that I keep on the patio throughout the summer months and then bring and put in either my sunroom at home, or I'm fortunate enough to have a big greenhouse here. So a few things will come back to the greenhouse for the winter, but a lot of it just goes right to our sunroom at home or other places throughout the house. But they love to spend their summers out on the patio. Some of them that need a little more filtered light live underneath some trees and on the patio where the trees shade them. Some of them live on top of a retaining wall where it's hot and dry and tons of sun. You know, some of my succulent type plants love that. So that's where they live during the summer months. But now we're getting towards fall. One of these days, we're going to start hearing about the dreaded F word, which of course is frost. So we're going to start hearing about a frosty night or something like that. There's nothing in the forecast yet, fortunately. So I wanted to come to you and talk a little bit about what I do with my houseplants before winter gets here so that you can avoid a few pitfalls, namely insect damage. First, let's talk repotting. So this is about your last chance to repot a houseplant. The reason I say last chance is we do not want to do a lot of repotting unless it's absolutely necessary or you have a very specific growing environment. You know, if you have a humid greenhouse or a sunroom with extra light, you know, maybe you're using grow lights, things like that, and you're actually able to get a tropical plant to continue to actually grow during the winter months, then you could probably uppot or repot a houseplant during the winter months. But for most of us who have to deal with shorter days, less sunlight, and less humid conditions in our home, winter would not be a good time to repot a plant. So this is that's why I was saying this is sort of your last chance to repot. So I brought up this beautiful pink princess philodendron just because it's one of my favorite plants, and we've got some beautiful ones in stock. So philodendron, if you're unfamiliar with them, are a moderate light plant. They tend to grow almost viney, so you can sort of see, kind of look inside here, you can see that kind of stem. It generally, philodendrons most often in the wild anyway, will grow against the base of a tree most often, and they kind of grow up and sort of attach themselves to the tree. Monstera would fall into that category. There's a bunch of other philodendron as well. But pink princess, which is a breeder's dream, is got that beautiful pink variegation on it. So two things I wanted to talk about, insects and repotting. So in terms of repotting, we generally don't want to go more than about 10 or 15% larger than the current pot, or you can just kind of use your fingers as a guide. I typically say that you don't want a pot to be any more than 1 inch or 2 fingers wider than it currently is. Oftentimes when we want to repot a houseplant, we think, I don't want to have to do this again, so I'm going to go from an 8-inch pot up to a 12-inch pot, or, you know, whatever the case may be. You want to go big so that you don't have to do it again. And generally what happens with that is we create this area. So let's say we're going from, this is a 1-gallon container, it's about 7 inches across. If we went up to, say, a 12-inch pot, we're going to have, theoretically, we're going to have 2.5 inches on either side of fresh soil with no roots. And oftentimes what happens, especially with potting mixes, is that potting mix will act like a sponge. And when you water it, that soil is going to just stay wet. But there's no roots in there. And so there's no root material to draw moisture out of there. And so what happens is we start to get bacteria and fungal issues that will build up in that wet soil, that damp sponge, and that can cause root rot issues. So what we like to do is just go no more than 1 inch wider or 2 fingers wider than the current pot. That gives it a relatively short amount of room for the roots to get out there and hopefully get into that fresh soil before we start running into root rot problems. And then, of course, it's always a good idea to let your houseplants dry out in between waterings. For philodendron, I like to use a nice chunky mix, and by chunky I mean something that has a lot of bark in it. In fact, if I grab a little bit of the soil off the top here, and I use the term soil loosely, but you can see it's just a lot of chunks of like fir bark and things like that. So this is a very chunky mix, whereas for annual plants, things like that, you're using a more traditional peat-based potting mix, which is going to be more spongy, but philodendron like a big chunky well-drained soil. So it is important that you match your plant with the type of soil that it would like most, or potting mix, planting mix, whatever you want to call it. I'm using the term soil, but most of these are soil-less mixes. But for philodendron and monsteras and things like that, we're going to use chunkier mixes. If you're repotting succulents or cacti, things like that, of course you're going to want to use a very well-drained succulent or cactus type soil, something that probably has a lot of pumice and perlite and maybe a little, some finer pieces of bark and very little peat. Of course, you want it to be very well drained, so we've got some good products for that. So that's a little bit about repotting, and I would say you want to try to get that done before the end of September. Give it a chance to grow some roots outside while it's still nice and warm and somewhat humid, and then of course watch the overnight lows so that you know when to bring it in. Speaking of bringing in tropical plants and or plants that have just been inside all summer long, this is a great time of year to get that plant outside and treat it for insects. If you are growing houseplants, inside, outside, doesn't matter, but if you're growing houseplants, you either already have or will deal with an insect problem of some kind. It is just, it's like a fact of life. Death, taxes, houseplants get insect. It is. It doesn't matter if you buy it from a great quality greenhouse, if you treated it when you got it home, whatever, you at some point are going to have some insect issues, and if you know how to care for them and treat them properly, it's not a big deal. If you bring a houseplant into your home that has mealybugs or aphids or whatever the case may be on it, and you don't treat it before you bring it, of course, now you're going to end up with a problem on your hands. And the reason I say that is that outside we can use some chemical sprays that we can't necessarily use inside and are far more effective. The other reason, of course, is it's just much easier to spray outside, where you don't have to worry about putting your plant in the laundry tub or putting a big plastic tarp down so that you don't get even safe products like neem oil, which I'll talk about in a moment. You don't want to get that on your hardwood floors or on your coffee table or whatever the case may be. So what I like to do is around this time of year, mid to late September, I like to give all of my tropical plants a really good spray. At this time of year, I'm using stronger chemicals on my houseplants than I would inside. So I brought up a couple here, and I'm going to tell you about these two, and I'll also mention the active ingredients in these. So I brought up two. This one is made by Bonide. It's called Systemic Insect Control 2. And the active ingredient is called acephate, Acephate, acephate. This is a very common greenhouse chemical. Acephate also goes by the name, or used to go by the name of orthene, and it makes a really good systemic insect control for houseplants, annuals, tropical plants, things like that. It lasts inside or on the surface of the plant for about 7 to 10 days, depending upon how much light the plant is getting and what the temperatures are and things like that. So it has what we call residual toxicity. It means the residue on the plant is going to stay there for a while, and it's going to continue to kill those insects, not just when you spray it right on it, but for a period of time after that. So in this case, about 7 to 10 days. This is a really effective insect control for aphids, for white flies, for mealybugs, things like that. What this will not do a very good job of is controlling spider mites. So we'll talk about that in a moment as well. So it does okay, but it's not the best. It's got a really broad mix of plants or insects that you can use this against. And I like to just use something like this. We sell this relatively inexpensive. I think they're about $7 or $8 trigger sprayer, which of course you're all familiar with. But the nice part about this is an upside down trigger sprayer, and you can actually spray like this inverted, which is really nice when you're trying to get into cracks and crevices on plants. Sometimes you can't just get in there like that. Sometimes you want to get up underneath somewhere and do a spray like that. So you can spray it regular way or upside down. The product is going to list on the label, use X number of tablespoons with a gallon of water. Of course, this doesn't hold a gallon, so you're just going to have to do a little bit of math. This is a quart sprayer, so 1/4 of a gallon. So you just divide that out. The other product I brought up here is this is made by a company called High Yield, and it's a product called Bug Blaster 2. And its active ingredient is bifenthrin, Bifenthrin. So if you're not near us and you're going to go to a store and look for these, you can look at the active ingredient. Just like in the pharmacy aisles, the over-the-counter stuff, it's going to list the active ingredient on the product. And so you look for active ingredient, and right over there it's going to say bifenthrin. The reason I tell you that is there are a ton of products on the market that really just don't work very well or have no residual toxicity to them. Or in the case of, like, for instance, Sevin. Many of you might be familiar with an insecticide called Sevin. Sevin has been around for so long that most insects, specifically aphids, have actually developed a resistance to Sevin because they've seen it so many times that these insects have developed a resistance. And, of course, you spray a product like that on it and some of them die, but the ones that don't die have built this resistance, and then those are the ones that keep procreating. And then, however many millions of or thousands of generations later, we have insects that are resistant to that particular chemical product. So both of these are going to be far more effective than, say, something like Sevin, which is carbaryl is the active ingredient in Sevin. So bifenthrin or acephate, both of these are, this is systemic. This is technically not systemic, but it does have a little residual toxicity. So it'll stay on the plant for a little bit anyway, especially if it doesn't rain right away. But the reason that I bring this one up is that bifenthrin happens to be a very good miticide. And one thing that some people struggle with on their houseplants, if you've ever tried to grow an alocasia or colocasia, you probably have experienced spider mites. For some reason, those particular plants tend to be spider mite magnets. So this is a very good miticide. In addition to controlling a lot of other insects, this will control that. It is important that when you're spraying, you try to get both the top and bottom of the leaf surface. So that's why I was showing you the upside down sprayer. So we want to spray and coat the leaf on the top. We also want to get underneath here and try to coat the bottom of the leaf. Specifically, say things like spider mites, they're going to hang out on the underside of the leaf. Another common insect pest for houseplants and greenhouses and tropical plants, things like that, are called thrips. They also happen to be on outdoor, landscape plants, but typically less of a nuisance out there. They also like to be on the bottom. They can be on top sometimes too, but traditionally you're going to see them on the underside of the leaf. So try to get underneath there and spray it. The other thing, especially if you're dealing with mealybugs, which are little white kind of fuzzy insects, they're actually sort of a aphid-like insect, but a lot of times you're going to find them down in the cracks and crevices. Like this is a new leaf that's coming out right here. You'd find it down inside there, or at the base of this leaf stem, like right down in there. There's a little, like, almost looks like a little valley down there. That's where they love to lay eggs, and then they will hide down in there, and then eventually they'll come out and start feeding on the plant. So if you're doing one of these sprays, it's a great idea to try to get in there, spray down inside those cracks and crevices, spray the bottom of the plant stem. Sometimes if you have a plant that has sort of a little woody or barky stem, sometimes you'll find insects in those cracks and crevices or eggs in there. So you'll want to spray the whole plant. And then the last thing that I like to do is apply this product right here. This is called Bonide Systemic Houseplant Insect Control. Its active ingredient is imidacloprid. And this is a granular product. It's like a little fine powder almost. And this, the reason that I like to do this is that this will last for about 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes up to 12 weeks in the plant. So when you bring this, so you're going to spray, try to control and kill insects right now, and then this product is going to take over and start to work for the next 6 to 8 weeks, although it usually takes a couple weeks to sort of activate, and then it'll start to work for 6, 8, 12 weeks, something like that. So there's a little chart on the inside of this label, and it's going to tell you for an 8-inch pot, use X amount, and you just sprinkle it on the surface. And then what I like to do is just take like a little plastic fork, or if you actually have like a little tiny houseplant rake, they actually make those, but you just kind of scratch it into the surface of the soil a little bit. It works best when it's in the soil and against the roots or stems of the plant, rather than, just right on the surface. So you want to kind of incorporate it just a little bit. If you are if you happen to be repotting a plant, you could actually use this as you're repotting and sort of work it into the upper surface of the soil as you're repotting. That would be a really effective thing too. So what I traditionally do is I'll spray my plants about the middle of September. I spray them again at the end of September if I haven't had to bring them in already. And then usually at that time on the late September, I'm going to do this systemic houseplant insect control. And the reason that I'm doing those 2 sprays is that a lot of insects have many, many generations per year. And if I spray the foliage and kill off the adults, it's very possible that those adults had already laid eggs, and those eggs will then hatch. And so I'm trying to get both of those generations under control before I bring it in for the winter. The last product that I brought up here, because this is something that I like to have in my arsenal for a couple of reasons. This is called Neem Max. It's made by Bonide. It's a neem oil product, and it also has another product in it. So this is a cold pressed neem oil, and it's a fungicide. It's a insecticide. It is a miticide, so it does control mites. It also controls nematodes, which are kind of a whole another category. But this has a wonderful battery-powered sprayer built into it, and produces a very fine mist. This is really good if you have spider mites in particular. But the other thing is this is 100% organic. It is completely safe to use in the home. Of course, I would want to still put down a plastic tarp or something so that I'm not getting that oil on the plant. But I like to keep this at home because if I do have any problems during the winter months, I will take my plants. In our case, we have a laundry tub down in the basement, and I'll put my plant into the laundry tub, and then I will spray it with Neem Max. You can certainly use this outside too. It's a wonderful product to use outside, but it is safe to use in the house as well. So this is a really good product to have. It also works on fruits and vegetables and all that kind of stuff, so it's approved for organic gardening. So that's a really good product to have in your arsenal as well.